Hello and welcome to the history of the Metacrisis. Today I had the great pleasure of having a discussion with the Polish philosopher Adam Widawski. Adam is a philosopher and a linguist, and he is the founder of the Logos Training Lab. Adam believes that language is the key to addressing the very issues of the metacrisis, and this is why we discussed about communication, propaganda, echo chambers, artificial intelligence, wars and geopolitics, politics, the economical troubles of our societies. In general, we covered the whole spectrum of the metacrisis, and it was a very interesting discussion. So give it a go and send me your thoughts. Thank you. So Adam, hello, welcome to the history of the metacrisis. Adam is a philosopher. He lives in Malta. I'm going to say a couple of words in my introduction. So let's dive into our questions today. I'm going to, as I said earlier while we were talking, I want to dive into the psychological drivers of the metacrisis, the philosophical questions affecting us, the environment, the world, politics, economics. This is actually your specialization. So welcome, but let's start by telling us a couple of words about you. How did you come to live in Malta? You are a Polish citizen, right?
That's right. Yeah, I'm Polish. I left Poland when I was 23 for England and stayed there for 15 years. Qualified as a teacher and did different things. And when COVID started, I actually ended up leaving. I was about to leave London anyway, and then was really not keen on staying in lockdown in a big city. So it kind of, COVID accelerated my plans, and stayed in Poland over winter. And then I found this place. I mean, Malta, I had really liked Malta already. I had been several times before then. And then I realized that it would be a nice place to kind of navigate from and observe the world. It's within Europe, but it's on the edge of Europe, and good for writing, good for my work, and good for teaching and the things that I do. So life is simple as well, and it's people are kind. I do enjoy atmosphere of Malta. So I've been here 3 years now, and enjoying it.
Yeah, it's a beautiful island. I really love it. I've been there several times. So let's start by addressing, before diving into the communication issues, you live in an island that is the most heavily fortified island in the world due to its history. So, yeah, this is actually the first one.
You didn't know that it's the most fortified.
Malta.
Is it? I didn't know that.
Yes. It is the most fortified island in the world. And then it is Santa Maria, where Napoleon died, the second most fortified island. Anyway, so as you live in a fortified island, let's start by geopolitics and wars. Right now, wars is marching, and it is surrounding Europe. What is your essence about the 21st century? How does a philosopher addresses the geopolitical questions of our times and geoeconomic? Because energy and international politics are interconnected to the extreme. What's your main take on the main issues? We have Ukraine, we have Syria, we have Palestine, we have Congo and the Central Africa. Mm-hmm. Well, is the window of peace closing?
Well, it's obviously a massive question to ask and answer. I don't consider myself a politically minded person or even ideologically directed in any way. So when I look at the problem of war, it's more a question of anthropology for me, and the question of to what extent it is our nature and to what extent it is actually conditioned, for us to wait. To what extent it is actually necessary for humans to be in conflict, and to what extent it's just a result of maybe miscalculation, cognitive errors, and not using our rationality well enough. So obviously there will be, it's not a straightforward answer to that, but so I wouldn't go into any one of those conflicts you mentioned, but it seems that the world is escalating into warfare, and I would say it has been going maybe for recent centuries. We had periods of war and periods of relative peace, but I think what really for me was most interesting about war is approaching the problem through a more systemic lens. So we traditionally consider war to be kinetic warfare, right? Violence that is physical, because that's the kind of the immediately given reality we engage with, and that's historically what we learn about societies when they war. It's the tanks, it's the weapons, physical, and biological death and damage and all of that. But I think with what's really sinister and fascinating at the same time, given my background in philosophy and observing the cybernetic age unfolding and artificial intelligence and the way language is used, because my background is also applied linguistics, so I teach language and I translate texts. And when we have information technologies expanding and having the tools such as artificial intelligence mediating human interactions, there's much more scope suddenly available for cognitive violence and psychological violence, which in previous centuries wasn't simply possible. Even in industrial age, if we follow the train of thought of Marshall McLuhan, he said the industrial age relied on fragmentation, right? So you break down processes into bits and into sub processes, so you can then automate and create an industrial process. So the same goes with communication. Communication wasn't that spread. Now everything's connected with everything, and this is why we see these cascading effects of conflict, polarization, all of those very detrimental effects that unintended consequences of end order actually occurring without many of the actors not intending them to occur. So my point is that a lot of this cognitive violence and psychological violence happens, and the feedback loops between the emitting of the message and then receiving it back, it's shorter and shorter. So we the way I see the world is like this increasing short-circuiting of the system on the self-destructive dynamic. So that's a lot of that war is basically, most of the war is invisible. So what we see, the conflict, the kinetic conflicts, obviously are the physical manifestation of the deeper underlying causes of those conflicts, which are ultimately problems of sense making, I think, just miscalculating, misunderstanding, and misperceiving reality, which then leads to a miscommunication and and conflict, like outright conflict.
Okay, I agree. But I also believe that there are also conflicting agendas. Nation states, as also as big multinational enterprises, do have conflicting agendas right now. One thing is the communication warfare, deception, and all these connected agendas that are multiplied right now within our information age. We have all the social media and artificial intelligence that are amplifying the effects. But on the other hand, you have also concrete conflicting agendas. We see that the unipolar moment of the international system has ended. The rest of the world, save the West, is more and more collaborating and de-dollarizing their economies. So you have the political crisis within the Western societies, as also to the rest of the world, contributing to the economic warfare, contributing to the communication warfare. And all this may or may not, hopefully, lead to a kinetic warfare, which is the last stage of war. It is not, we live in an era, I believe, of ongoing warfare. In 2013, the Russian army, his name was General Gerasimov, published the Gerasimov Doctrine, which, if you're going to study it, speaks of an ongoing warfare never ending. So we just move from one phase to the next. And there I see your concept of a loop, which is becoming shorter and shorter. But if we allow this loop, as citizens of the world, really manifest itself, as it becomes shorter and shorter, at the end, the window will close. And at the end of the window, there are nukes. And this is a very serious factor of the Metacrisis. We live not only in mad, mutually assured destruction through the nukes, but also mutually assured destruction through communication, because the more the deception and the more the psychological operations through social media, through mass communication, through exponential technologies like AI, are going to contribute within societies to break down the social order, the less we are going to be able, as a global community, to understand each other, speak the same language. You deal with linguistics. So if the truth is not absolute, if we cannot even agree with each other about what is true and what is not, then how are we going, we as citizens and the nation states, through diplomacy and international organizations and everything, how are we going to find a common ground in order to solve the big questions like energy, geopolitical spheres of influence, money? Because right now we have an extraordinary debt at the world level. So in order to deal with these questions, you need international cooperation, collaboration, agreements, treaties. And I don't see that coming.
No, I'm afraid yes, I like the way you pointed to deception and lies, and I think about this a lot, and I really do think that as a short-term strategy, misrepresenting reality is very effective as diplomatic warfare, for example. We've seen it throughout history, and we all know Machiavelli's The Prince and how it's been implemented and almost promoted even by prominent diplomats, let's say even 20th century. But yeah, I don't think, because of the cybernetic age, this is not viable enough. Like the strategy of fooling people into wars and fooling people into buying stuff and fooling people into selling them political ideas has stopped working, but the habit of doing it hasn't stopped, right? I think this is the mismatch. And I agree with your diagnosis that the West is the most troubled, because the West, our systems have, as I see it, the systems have evolved on this basis of just faking it until you're making it. And then you have a lot of capital built on very shaky foundations. And now these foundations are they're cracking, and we see it all every day in social media. So for me, ultimately, I mean, I could talk about outside forces as you draw them, but I don't really pay that much attention to that. For me, it's always ultimately the problem of consciousness, communication, and language. It's always that, because that's what I know, first of all. That's what I deal on a day-to-day basis. I teach people how to speak clearly, think clearly, and communicate. Exactly, because I think your point you're making, that first of all, we have to be able to understand each other and not get triggered by opposing opinions. And that requires not only technical training in language and communication, but actually deep self-work, right? So we need to be able to realize that there are pockets of ignorance in us. There are pockets of misunderstanding. There are pockets of, we must wish to learn and relearn and unlearn stuff that sometimes is very precious for us. We are attached to some ideas that really worked for us and brought us prosperity, friends, maybe, like precious stuff. And we have invested in some ideas which suddenly in the world of exponential change don't work anymore. And it's sad to let go, to let some ideas die, or some worldviews die. And we actually have to let them die, which is maybe a bit dramatic way of thinking about it, but I believe it is like that. It's a psychological, we have to go through this process of like death and rebirth, the ancient mythos of the snake serpent devouring its tail, and then we have the Christian story of the cross, and all of those all of those traditions, they come back to this ancient or eternal idea of we have to be able to let go. So ultimately, it's the world which is changing constantly, where nothing can be set in stone, and everything depends on how well we adapt, which is actually our superpower as human beings, how well we adapt to changing circumstances. And this world demands of us that we really level up, and we really understand our nervous system, we really understand our language. It doesn't mean, well, we happen to use English language, which is useful for us, and we can communicate with many people. But really, it's any language. It's language itself, and communication as an interface, intersubjective interface of that. So I will just really encourage people to pay more attention to how the way they speak makes them think, and vice versa. How our nervous system is connected to the way we represent reality in words, or even present reality, And so neuroscience, cognitive science, behavioral science, and different branches of psychology, together with applied linguistics, I find it's a very fascinating time to study these disciplines, and actually, and not in abstraction, writing papers about some details, but like in the context of the metacrisis, it becomes an ongoing study, an ongoing experiment, which then through even events like this, discussing things online and then sharing and getting feedback, we are contributing to raising this awareness. So as a linguist and philosopher, I feel this is the best of my contribution to raise awareness about this.
Do you feel, with your expertise, that people nowadays speak the same language? I observe people discussing through platforms, even through the written press. And sometimes I get that they don't really understand what the writer is saying, or what the other communicator is saying. I believe that we live in very segmented echo chambers, very departmentalized rooms of thought, and everybody speaks his own language, her own language, while cannot really listen to the other person. What is your take? Did the communication technologies bring us closer or push us further apart?
So you mentioned this term echo chamber. It is a design. You see, it is by design that this happens, because you see, obviously, the more we disagree, the more energy goes into the system, and the more the algorithms are fed, and the model. This is the idea. Well, the insight. By Tristan Harris and Daniel Schmachtenberger talked about it in War on Sense Making already, like 4 years ago. So, yeah, I think it's a really, really interesting challenge now. So it's almost like a double bind situation, where we are limited to those networks, which are the largest networks that actually make us connect, like we have met on LinkedIn, right? And then there is an algorithm protocol within that network that is optimized for fragmentation rather than unification, right? So even though look, there's contrast between what McLuhan said about the electronic age. Its nature, its very quality is that it unifies. But then we still have these industrialist ways of fragmenting stuff as feeding the kind of economy, the attention economy, and hacking our nervous system in a way that we overreact, that we become reactive rather than responsive to the messages. And I do agree with you that unless we actually pay mindful attention to our language and to the language of others, and like what is communicated, maybe that person, like where's that person coming from, what is the background, like we rarely get the chance to actually stop and reflect, and what do they mean by this word, what does this concept mean in their reality, does it really mean the same as I consider it from my own reality tunnel. So all of that seems like an esoteric thing to have all of those strategies for merely communicating, but at the same time it becomes like the minimum, really. So in response to what you say, I think obviously because our tools have become so powerful, going back to Daniel's point, because our tools have become so powerful, they're like sacred, like not sacred, but a godly power basically. But our power has to match that in order not to mess up. So we have to really, evolve cognitively and neurocognitively, I would say, and linguistically.
I agree with you, but I'm not so sure that we have the biological infrastructure to do this, especially in that short notice. Well, species and humans, yeah, humans evolve through millions of years.
Yes.
Not do this in 2 decades. And right now, what I see the techno-optimists doing is they are trying to upgrade the human race, the human species, through implants. Right. Which I believe is I don't know what's your take on it, but in my honest opinion, I believe that it is a hubris against nature.
Yes, you see, so we have this predicament now. Evolutionarily, we have never had to evolve at this rate, and we do have technologies which can promise plausibly, for many people, being competitive only if we get implanted and get our kind of somehow merge with AI. So the whole transhumanist idea, the agenda seems to be about this. But then again, who are the administrators of those technologies? Like, can you trust their sense making in the first place as they're designing those tools? So this is back to the Consilience Project paper, very interesting, very critical to read, I think. Technology is not values neutral. Yeah, it's we cannot do that. I don't think it's safe to do that. And on the other hand, we have never had a chance to actually evolve very quickly because the biological evolution is linear, not exponential, as it's a different kind of function. So in any case, but then we have the idea of a nonlinear shift, right? So perhaps it might be a phase shift, as Daniel suggests, like from an egg to a chicken, or from a fetus to a human being which is born. And perhaps this is the most convincing scenario that, for me, we cannot predict the result of this current transformation. We know we cannot. Well, I agree with you that it's hubristic to think you just fix the human being. No, human beings, it's not about fixing anything. It's about becoming whole, as you are already. But perhaps a certain phase of human evolution is ending. And another one, which we cannot even anticipate from this limited point of view, is coming up. And yeah, I even had a conversation with a friend of mine who's a um, evolutionary biologist, and he said he agreed that it might be like the shift between the single cell and multi-cell organism. So the explosion of consciousness may be really radical, and it seems to be like it's necessary. If anything saves us, it's that kind of thing will save us, and we have seen it in nature before. So if I was to bet on anything, I would bet on that rather than on technocratic takeover and reducing yourself, crawling into your metaverse pod, and so on. Although it will be, I think, also looking at the way our consciousness is conditioned through those tools and through those AIs, and the incentive that associated with that process and development. I think it will be increasingly tempting and deceitfully imperceptible to actually give in to that idea. I already have, when I happen to speak to many people when I teach, and I had a student recently saying, it's okay, like there's this learned helplessness. People just give in. People just feel like they have no power over their own fate, over their own agency. That is the worst tragedy, I think. And that is already, I think, the result of, let's say, a decade or even 1 decade with those kinds of tools, with those amounts of data, of modifying behavior and modifying sense making that is deprived of a sense of agency and sense of independent thought, critical thought, and any seeing a scenario outside the box that is delivered by the major stories, major narratives, and all of those dystopic kind of scenarios.
Agreed. So what you're describing is actually for us to understand that from unicellular organisms, the atom, the personhood, we're becoming a superorganism. We're becoming a human species that should bring itself to the world through consciousness, through an expanded consciousness. But this, in my point of view, presupposes that we celebrate our humanity, we celebrate our human nature. While right now, these new technologies are actually pushing us to push our human nature aside, to become more machine-like, less empathy-oriented, less understanding, projecting, and more mechanized. I give you input, you create a response. I give you instruction, I probe you,
right.
You give me an answer. And this is what actually we are doing with artificial intelligence right now. Look at ChatGPT or any other of these technologies. What we are doing, what the technology is asking us to do, is to probe the machine. While on the other hand, I feel that the machines are probing us.
Right. Thank you. Brilliant. Yeah. Yes. And I've been thinking about it for a long time now. And it's dark and fascinating.
Yeah.
Because look at it. Like, even like going back to people like Heidegger and Spengler and all of those organic thinkers in the German idealism tradition, and Nietzsche, even, they all talk about life and they all talk about humanity. And then there's this machine which is cold and not really alive. I mean, machines used to be dead. Baudrillard talks about machine as dead. Machine function it's perfect, it's effective, it's efficient, but it's not alive. Whereas now, look, with AI interfaces with our own consciousness. So now we have a hybrid, and effectively the hybrid is like an undead entity, which is interfaced with our own reality and our own structuring of our world and our communications and so on. But look, if we look back and look at this, even like industrial technology, or even pre-industrial technology, agricultural technology, all of those every technology conditions us to assist it. Like you said, like if we flip that on its head and actually say, it's not that technologies assist us, we assist them. Because if we spend enough long time with any one technology, we are commanded to operate on the basis of what that machine, the operation of that machine, right? So if you spend too much time on social media, you will end up reacting in the real life in the same way that you have been trained to react by AI algorithms. And likewise, if you're a factory worker in, let's say, 1800s or 1900s, you spent 8 hours doing a repetitive move. This is where the whole Marxist critique of capitalism emerges, as well as like the workers alienated from the work because they never see the whole, they only see the piece of work. So it's not satisfying and so on. And their behavior becomes kind of automated. So there's this theme across history. Likewise, if you're a farmer, even, you still need a robot, like a systematic intervals of doing certain kinds of repetitive activities. Even though
yes, but the difference with the farmer is that he sees his result. He finds meaning through his work, while the industrial worker, he becomes a cog in the machine. Because he never sees the end result of his work.
Exactly, and you also work
with he loses meaning.
Right, and you also work with life itself, and you work with soil, and you are embedded in the land, right?
Yeah.
So let's say we look at agricultural stage, and there is still, like, with the plow we can be more efficient, but then that kind of robotizes us a bit, or exploits maybe that animal that before used to be a sacred entity, but now is a tool for working. So it's kind of desacralizing the relationship between living entities. But then there's a new stage, so even more powerful machines. Now we have industrial technology, so you can manufacture even more. You can mass produce. You can also mass produce death. In 20th century we had gulags, we had gas chambers. That is the ultimate dark consequence of industrial technology also. And now there's another stage. Look, and now we have these digital networks and computer chips, microprocessing, and we have AI and the internet. And so now, like you said, robotization of the human being is much more powerful. So, but it also liberates us to the same extent if we are discerning enough and we use it for the right purposes, like this chat, right?
Exactly. No, I believe that they have, as Heraclitus had it, there is no good without bad. There is no good without evil. Yes, these technologies bring us closer, but on the other hand, they presuppose a very elevated way of thinking, a very high educational level for the individual. And right now, most people, as they are pressed from everyday ordinary life, don't even have the time to invest on upgrading themselves, because in order to use the machine instead of being used by the machine, you need to invest enormous time of money and of capital on yourself.
Into yourself.
This is a presupposition.
Exactly. And see, I'm coming from education. Like, that's my background. I've been working with people all my life. So the problem I see now is that the education system itself has been set up, like, let's say, the early 20th century kind of Rockefeller style, education was set up to produce those people for those factories, not to develop their humanity. There was a model, there was Bildung model, in Germany. The Berlin University, the von Humboldt came up with a modern higher education system, and those ideas were there, and now we see them kind of reignited in the Nordic countries and elsewhere. And I'm sure that will have to be the standard for humanity, to develop creativity, to develop, soft skills, communication skills, self-awareness, all of that. But right now we are, like you said, we are stuck in this exponential curve of technological change, while most of people not having learned enough, because they've invested their life into whatever they were told to be successful, and they have built some success, but suddenly you hit a wall. Like for you and me, maybe, I'm not wealthy by any stretch, but I've invested in philosophy. I happen to be able to understand things, which doesn't mean I'm successful in the eyes of most of people, because obviously the notions of success are another thing that can be created and generated in perceptions in whatever way using those tools. So yeah, I think it's a real challenge for education right now to reassign the value, the currency of what it means to be educated in this time, while those systems which have to be functioning, which are increasingly dysfunctional, even the largest, most prestigious institutions still rely on dysfunctional models of thinking, and they have to reform themselves. But even human decision making is slower than the pace of technology that is revolutionizing everything right now. Not even evolving, but revolutionizing. So yeah, so it's a very real problem, and I like the metaphor someone used, that we are in an aircraft, and we need to replace the engine without landing. This seems to be the predicament we're in, and whether it's education or law or governance or any other area, any other system, this seems to be the real challenge now, and somehow we need a miracle, right? Because we are still so used to thinking linearly. You do A, it will get you to B and C and D, but clearly that approach, like you said, what we like biological evolution, like that approach is not sufficient. So somehow we have to really be both scientifically critical about reality, but also I really believe we have to look into the esoteric aspects of knowledge as well, and be able to transcend the merely rational understanding, and then, like people did in the Renaissance, reconcile those two areas. So our spirituality, our sense of intrinsic values and intrinsic commitments that are not subject to some calculation but deeply felt and embodied, have to be merged with deep expertise and critical analysis and everything else. And when they disagree, we should look into that. Why does it feel differently than it can be understood? That is the real challenge. I think I can't see people talking about this enough. Although I think Nora Bateson is doing a great job kind of merging, being really critical, really knowledgeable, and with the lineage of her family, and then also really promoting art and human relationship and all those things that are completely marginalized from the discourse, from even like discourse within the Metacrisis community. I think it's so easy to make it technical again, but I think the problem is beyond technical. Like we talk even about technology, but I would bring in Heidegger, who was the subject of my dissertation, that technology itself is not a technological problem. There's a metaphysical problem, and the metaphysics is something without a clear idea of what is the ground of our reality here, as we are in the West at this stage. Unless we have some degree of agreement about that, after all of our metaphysics have collapsed, we are screwed. We have to be able to arrive at a set of values that we can call human values, and not only Western values, but human values universally. And this is the tall order. Obviously, no one person would be able, I think, to devise any of that. But first time in history, we do have the technologies to facilitate that through conversations like this one. So I don't think, as naive and idealistic it might seem, I don't think we can afford to not be idealistic. because
Yes, I
yeah,
agree.
yeah,
I totally agree. Idealism is the only thing that can push us through the meta crisis, I believe, and we have to be really rigorous with ourselves, really rigorous with the environment, try to do the hard science, but also cultivate the space in between. This is actually what Nora told me as the final advice she had for the young people today. When I asked her, okay, what would you advise young persons today? Share your stories, was her advice. Share your stories, create the space in between. Start communing, not communicating with each other. Cultivate the necessary words and linguistics and ideas that will bring you closer. Yes, I totally agree with you. But on the other hand, I find it an enormous challenge because right now, well, let me take you to another subject. We know, you know, the theory of Ian McGilchrist, why we have this dual brain, this two different parts of the brain, because we have a double attention. One for the specific, for the immediate, for what we need to grab and eat and hunt, and the other for environmental awareness. While these new technologies hijack both these attentions, they push messages to us directed to the immediate attention, something that needs to be said now at this specific moment. And then they hijack also our wider attention with big messages that presuppose our ability to handle both messages at the same time in really fast speeds and with an information overflow that exceeds our biological capacity to handle it. And that's why you have all these people being burned in the social media. So, well, we know we can absorb information about a rate of, I believe it was something like 1,100 bits per second, something like that. Well, our biological infrastructure absorbs about 780 bits per second. So we actually are left with 320. The screens are bombarding us with 4,000 bits per second. We really cannot handle it biologically. We don't have the bandwidth. We don't have the capacity. You understand what I'm saying? And this is the very challenging task that we have in our hand, to understand our very nature, to control the messages, to control the machine in order to upgrade us. And this, we need to do it very fast, in very short notice, in very short time windows. Because if we cannot do it, then we will lose the underlying infrastructure of the societies, the common base, the common values, the common ideas. Because if you ask anybody on the street, nobody wants war. Yes, but in the same time, war is happening.
But nobody wants to suffer either.
Yeah, nobody wants political polarization. But in the same time, he cannot discuss concrete ideas with his political opponent.
Right.
So I believe that we have the necessary basis, societal basis. We have empathy, we have understanding, we have consciousness, but we don't focus on what we have. We are only focused on what we are going to miss. What's your take?
Yes. You see, so this, and this effectively downgrades us, right, as biological beings. So, but what can we do? We don't have to be on those platforms all the time. See, for me, I find it really difficult because you see, I do like to speak the truth as I see it, and I find it's a purifying ritual to articulate yourself clearly, even if it is polarizing. And I have days when I feel like I don't want to do it, but when I think it's like, you can't have no conflict. There will be conflict. If you want to be honest and authentic, that is not to say that your intention is to create conflict, but sometimes it is necessary to state reality as it presents itself. And I think there's not enough of that. And I've been trying to do it, but sometimes I do feel guilty because I feel like, well, I just created. maybe someone will obviously misread that, and misunderstand, and then they will take action on the basis of that. But you can't, what can you do? Like, this is, I believe everyone has the obligation to do and say whatever they feel is necessary at any given time, in a way that is not intended to be inflammatory, unless there's someone who does that to you, then by demonstrating you can do the same to them, deters them. So demonstrating that you can weaponize language is an effective deterrent against someone who would otherwise try that again against you. But that means you cannot be emotional about it. You must be really calm and really zen, and give them just as much. It must be a proportionate response, so that you don't actually escalate the issue. And then how do you learn to do it? Like, if you don't commit a lot of your time to language and communication, then you will not. You have to learn it. And I think it's just very tricky, because we want to be peaceful and relatable and so on and so on, while at the same time, the more we are 100% peaceful, the more we are being taken advantage by those who are not, because then there's asymmetrical advantage, right? And this is, if AI has no feelings, it will exploit every act of kindness and use it as a weapon against you.
This is the game theoretical approach. What is game A doing to us all? I know that there are good people out there working for a possible game B that will move beyond and more broadly see the game, beyond the game A, the game theory. Because as long as this is the problem with our societal infrastructure of antagonism
right? Yes.
Instead of synagonism. We don't synagonize with each other, where our competition would make you better and make me better. We only antagonize with each other, wanting to destroy each other, because if I don't take the advantage first, I'm going to leave you the space open for you to take all the advantage and then destroy me. But this is a mindset, I believe. This is, we haven't been like that for a long history of time. Yes, there were conflicts for millennia, actually. Yes, there were fights. Yes, there were wars. But this kind of mindset to everybody, to ordinary people, has never been that aggravated. Right now, you see that happening in your neighborhood, in your village, in your school, in your working environment.
Working place, yes. I've experienced that a lot, yeah.
I don't think this was the case in the past. We used to have workers' movements. Right now, we don't have workers' movements, where the workers were fighting for their rights. Yes, you may have had, I don't know, some antagonisms about who is going to be the president of the trade union. But at the base, the workers were working in order to bring forward the same agenda. You have had political parties that they did have a political base, that their members agreed with each other. Right now, within political parties, nobody agrees with anybody. You have thousands of different agendas, and then you only have some electoral mechanisms in order to bring some of these elements of the agendas forward. So this becomes a power game, not a finding a common understanding game that used to be in the past.
Right. And so it becomes an instrumental advantage over something for another, a means to ends, right? Communication becomes instrumental, which something I see as the critical point at this. Communication is not sacred. Nora Basin talks about how communication is sacred. 3 years ago, I gave a talk about how we should treat language as sacred. and the truth as something that we should really, really strive to uphold. But in a world where lying to yourself is the currency of success, and in a world where faking reality on social media will give you more attention and more profit and more following and so on, it really becomes a real problem where, like you said, no one agrees. There's political parties have less in common than ever because of that, because the business model of those networks, which dominate our communications, is such that conflict is more profitable than community, right? Building community. So then it's like how do you like, again, we need people to build infrastructures that are game B kind of oriented around game B, but then at the same time, because I do believe even if we expand the timeline and we look at anthropological time of human evolution, we really had wars, and the incentive for conflict as a systemic fixture for the past 12,000 years, since agriculture demanded that we need protection from the state, from authority, from sovereignty, from and then we have the industrial order, and now we have these kind of industrial logic applied to information networks, which then manifests in kind of breaking down of the entire system, and we suddenly, we need to do something about it. But this 12, or let's say between 10 or 12,000 years when violence was necessary, is just 1% of the total what we know about the evolution of human beings, even from the shorter timelines. But people believe in different timelines, obviously. Some people believe it's millions of years, but it's still, even if we agree that we have been conditioned into this mindset of game A, of game theory, even if it's 12,000 years, that's still just a little fracture of our true nature, which is humanity, which is communing, collaborating, and getting together. And when we get together, we're pretty amazing as humans, aren't we? We really interface in the way that we come up with these brilliant ideas. And but then again, you see there's this dark side which is often ignored. When things go well, it's easy to ignore the dark side. So I always I really like Jung and Nietzsche, and when they try to remind us that in order to be whole, you must attend to your dark side too. You must have that attention to the aspects of yourself that are in the shadow, and we all have them, and we should not be ashamed of them. We should just, the more we are aware of them, where we are envious, when we are angry, when we are, deceitful, when we lie, when we betray, the more we are aware of that being an aspect of ourselves, as uncomfortable as it may be, the more we are empowered to not act on those triggers, the more we are able to develop the meta perspective to that communication that reaches us from the social media. And actually, hang on a minute, like Viktor Frankl said, there is a gap between a stimulus and a response. And I think the more we attend to this unsavory aspect of human nature, the greater power we have to actually not enact those aspects. And what we have seen historically in 20th century especially, which is so present now, isn't it? Relating that our current situation to that situation, to communism, fascism, and only with much more powerful technology and relatively similar consciousness. You see, what happened there is that complete denial of that darkness was weaponized only through radio and press, not even television. I come from Poland, which was the left under Stalinist rule for 50 years or so. So it's deeply embodied in my own consciousness, living here in the free world, in the world, communicating with people freely, like with you, and brainwashing and being in denial of your own dark side. I think it's something that should really, as uncomfortable as it is, should be addressed. Like, no amount of non-violent communication and coaching and whatnot will give you anything until you are willing to face your own demons and your own ignorance and your own pettiness and everything, because we all have those, and it's okay. This is what it means to be whole. You know what the word holy comes from that. You are whole.
What is your practice? How do you do it? About yourself? Let me tell you about me. What I do is I make a story for myself. I see myself from the outside in. I create, a narrative. Okay, there is this guy, Alexandros, his name, he comes from Greece, he's 47 years old, this is his background, and right now there is this message going to him. How is he going to respond? So I'm creating a meta-narrative about myself in order to address everyday problems. What's your method? How do you do it? What's your practical steps to do it? Let's give some practical advice to people.
Well, I think first of all that's a very good, straightforward strategy, isn't it? Like, it doesn't really matter. It's that you feel angry. Yes, fine. But why am I feeling angry? What is that? What was the first instance of me getting angry over something like this? It's
introspection.
Sorry?
Introspection.
And what you're talking about is, I think, John Vervaeke came up with this idea, internalizing the sage. So internalizing a character, internalizing wise people in history. What would Buddha do? What would Jesus do? What would, any other individual that you consider as your role model, how would they act? And seeing yourself, how would I act if I was in the shoes of that person? It's like I previously said it, to understand the context, back to Nora Bateson, understand the context from which the communication is emitted, or from which it comes. What is the reality of that person? That builds a relationship, because maybe there's something in that so-called distant reality that you already experienced in your own. So we always need to remember I think we have obligation to communicate and speak our truths, our perspectives, the best way we can. But equally, we should explore the space and place from which the other messages which we disagree with come from, and what motivates them. What do those people care about? What is their experience? Where were they hurt? Where were they deceived? Where were they, where was their trust broken? Right? Stuff like that. And that makes us very vulnerable, because then we have to kind of reflect and think about our own stuff like this. I don't think it's necessary to have a therapist for that. I think it's much more important to try to be honest with oneself, because ultimately all of that boils down to what extent we are capable of withstanding our own truth, like to what extent we are able to even also accept that we deceive ourselves, and deceiving ourselves is necessary for survival. Like in nature, we have animals which deceive to survive, and it's natural. But then humans obviously have morality and these big spiritual ideas and whatnot. So we are somewhere in between, anthropologically speaking, we are this biological entity, but we also have these metastructures and ideologies and values and goals and poetry and culture and science, and which we are not merely animal kingdom. They make value judgments, and we create moralities and whatnot. So we are quite one leg in the animal kingdom and one leg transcending that kingdom. And I think that is what creates this tension, this something that we are through Heidegger speaking, we are the only being that becomes a problem for itself. And it's great. I mean, it's great. It's not easy, but for me, it's a journey I never get bored of, to analyze myself and analyze my actions and how I interface with the world and how people interface. It's fascinating, and working with people and having conversations like this one. So yeah, I think just looking at it as a process as well, and try to be honest with oneself. A very first tip, basic tip everyone can follow, I think, in this time, is as much as you can, try not to lie to yourself. It will be increasingly difficult, but I think that is where our true power is. Like, you don't have to be active and assertive with your own ideas. You, by simply not participating in the lies, in the deceptions and illusions, no matter how sweet they seem or how attractive the thing you can get for lying is, try to disengage and see what happens. And then what happens to you? What happens to your understanding of yourself? This has been very powerful for me. I mean, especially since March 2020, I was reading, because I really like Dostoevsky and Nietzsche, and they really focus on the self-deception and the value of truth itself, and how elusive this is, and how you can't really pin it down back to McGilchrist. You can't really represent it in a definition. It's not that kind of truth. It's what is authentically kind of, how can you live, how can you embody authenticity, how can you be in service of something that is not deliberately deceiving. Because the more you are in touch with your own truth, the more you will be able to recognize the truth in the world, and the more you'll be able to then be immune to those algorithms and to those narratives and stories being spun, in our broken information ecology. So very, very powerful, very simple, but difficult at the same time, to try to be as truthful as possible. And
even in a post-truth environment that we live
now. I mean, post-truth,
even in deep fakes environment.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the best strategy to actually discern in the post-truth environment. Because, like you said, without a common understanding of some principle of truthfulness or reality that's ground reality, we are lost. So, but we will always be lost if we don't start with ourselves. So it's not a political project for me, or it's not a technical project for me. It's ultimately it's a psycho-spiritual process within and every individual that we have to start with. And most of people it seems to me, there's a lot of bypassing in the form of intellectualizing about things and talking about things, but actually not embodying, because that's where the real work is. That's where the real discomfort and no glamour and no success, perceived success is. But at the same time, it's immensely powerful, because by knowing yourself, you actually cultivate epistemic hygiene that you need to approach to this post-truth fabricated realities that overlap each other in our day-to-day public discourse. So I have not found a better way, and it hasn't. I consider it successful because I have been living life, finding meeting interesting people like you increasingly in the last 4 years. So I'm very grateful for taking the path I have taken, and excited about the future. Like, despite, I think we have all, in a way, those of us who are really interested in those most darkest problems and most overwhelming issues, in a way, haven't we waited for a challenge like this so we can actually face these dragons and and use the best of our knowledge that in times of peace is kind of useless because you just have to conform and do the same thing every day. I think we are in our element, and I haven't seen so many people prior to, let's say, March 2020. I thought I was isolated. I was in my library for 20 years doing my thing and hoping I will teach at the university, maybe, and 3 people will read my PhD and whatever. It's like, no, I don't care. Like, I meet people like this, and we have interesting conversations. Fascinating each time. It's really it's a very optimistic time for me. I've never been more hopeful than now, despite the dark clouds on the horizon as they are. It's necessary that we go through the darkest of the night, but the dawn is on the other side. I like to remind myself about that. And yeah.
So you believe that the third attractor that Daniel is searching is there? We just miss to see it right now.
I think the third attractor is the interface of life itself, and it will direct humanity when humanity is ready. We will be, adjusted to the current trajectory. But life has been here for so long. We've only been here for like a fracture, maybe 3 minutes from midnight on the, if we scale it. But so yeah, I think there's much more vitality now in my life, having the awareness of all of us kind of being, working, committing our own time, and not expecting to be paid for doing the work and writing stuff and having podcasts. I think we've really been awaiting this, like there will be pushback. There will always be pushback by the people whose business depends on us not doing this, right? They rely on us miscommunicating rather than communicating. But I think that the age we have entered, it will be, if you can't be authentic, if you can't be truthful, if you can't communicate properly, then you will not be able to retain trust and sell your product or service or be successful in any meaningful way, because the techniques and tricks that used to work will not work any longer. In fact, they don't work any longer, which is when we look at the corporatized media, how they had to sack all the people. And now all those people, they create their own podcasts because technologies are available, right? So, but then going back to, so there will be increasing, I think, purification of discourse perhaps, and better communication. But at the same time, I agree with you that there's the not to forget about total decentralization being insufficient. We still need some sort of governance that's binding with healthy values. So that aspect I can't speak to because I've always worked with individuals, but I'm sure that the evolutionary process will adjust itself, and everything will fall into place once enough purging is done. I guess it will not be easy or painless, but I think. Yeah, I think there's a real sense of consciousness shifting towards better days. Like I mean, there's a certain, perhaps it's still a minority of consciousness, but at the same time, I would say it's unstoppable.
This is very hopeful. You are the most hopeful person I have spoken in this podcast, I believe. You are the most optimist of us all, which is great. This is a nice message, especially for young people to hear, to listen to. You work with people in your ordinary life. You work with business people, with international professionals. What is the feedback that you are getting about these discussions that we're having? Do people in your everyday environment bother themselves with big questions like that?
Well, I incorporate these ideas into my programs, into my courses, and I find there's a sense of freshness and engagement, and just having a conversation about stuff that most of people are scared to talk about or uncomfortable, and actually that's how we practice, our communication, and we'll have to practice continuously. So I find a warm, welcome of these, like being able to be frank about stuff. I think people are really scared to just, there's a sense of, there's like an unwritten fear, like there's not unwritten law, I want to say, there's like an implicit fear in people thinking, like being scared to be themselves, and I just don't want them to think that. I think everyone should be able to articulate their honest, sincere opinions, with regard to developing this care for brighter days ahead. So we do touch on attention economy and the Metacrisis and the cognitive literacy and psychology and everything else, and how that fits with technology and information networks and so on. So I think that's the clients I have had, for some of them 2 years, 3 years now, and I think they appreciate that. They learn something new. Perhaps we don't have the name for it yet, but it's a really critical approach to learning about language and communication, in the sense that they also have to be, in a way, leaders in their own lives, because there's such a crisis of authority now that we kind of have to discover this leadership within. So yeah, I'm really happy with the way it's been going, and we're preparing an online course with my friend Nicola, who's a course designer, and she worked she spent like 20 years working for major language education industry companies, and we're working on the breakdown of discourse, like how language is manipulated and how miscommunication is normalized and stuff like that. So going through via negativa again, the dark side of communication. I think a lot of people talk about what it should be, but I think we really understand things when we understand what they are not. So we will
we refute the refutation.
Right, refute the refutation, or unfold or expose the misfunction of why things don't work, and that triggers individual approach, because everyone has to learn in their own way, really. So I think modeling this open communication style, just dialogue, and having the freedom and daring to be imaginative in your ideas, not only critical, but imaginative. I think that's got a really strong currency right now.
Good, excellent. Well, let's close it right now. Let's wrap it up, because I know you have some business to do. But tell me, if you would have one advice to give to young people, to students today, what would that be? Forecasting the next 5 years, because right now we don't have really wide horizons. We cannot give an advice to young people for the rest of their lives, because their lives are going to change multiple times in their time scales.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I would say really the first, if there was just one thing, as much as it is possible and safe, try not to lie to yourself. So learn to know yourself and observe what happens when you do it, and how your life might change as a result of that.
Good. Adam, thank you very much. I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope we're going to have some more chances in the future to speak again, and it will be a pleasure.
Great. Thank you very much, Alexandros. I appreciate your interest. Thanks.
Excellent. I'll see you again, my friend.
Cheers.
So this was my conversation with Adam. I hope you enjoyed it and you really have some thoughts coming out of it and some ideas that you may want to communicate to me. If you haven't subscribed already to my channel, please subscribe also to YouTube and my Patreon page. Send me your thoughts, your ideas, your comments. Tell me what is bothering you concerning the Metacrisis. I'll try to address it the next time with my discussions with interesting people from all around the world. Thank you for watching this episode. See you next time.